Tonight, the people who helped change the face of Britain.
What they brought with them and enriched every aspect of the life of our city, and for which we are enormously grateful.
And the resistance they overcame.
Australia doesn't want them. Well, we don't want them.
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. 40 years ago, almost to the day, the infamous Ugandan dictator Idi Amin made a shock announcement that would change the way Britain looks today. He forced tens of thousands of Asians to abandon their lives, leave his country and flee to the UK. In tonight's programme, Fiona Foster investigates how these exiles helped transform the UK and are now proud to be British.
Britain today is a truly multicultural society, made up of people from more than 190 different countries, speaking more than 240 different languages. Parts of the UK are now an ethnic melting pot. But the journey to British multiculturalism was just beginning when these Ugandan Asians were exiled 40 years ago. It was August 1972 when the brutal African dictator Idi Amin made his shock announcement. He expelled Asian communities from Uganda, claiming they were sabotaging the country.
Their main interest has been to exploit the economy. They have been milking the economy of the country.
Amin gave the Asians 90 days to leave the country, forcing them to leave behind everything they owned, turning them into pariahs. But it wasn't just the Ugandan Asians who felt the shockwaves of Idi Amin's decision. It also caused a major headache for the UK. Because although it was in Africa where the Asian communities, their businesses, their very way of life would be destroyed, it was Britain that was expected to pick up the pieces. As former colonial rulers, Britain was expected to give most of the exiles a new home. But back in the 70s, the UK was a very different place.
We must be mad, literally mad as a nation, to be permitting the annual inflow of some 50,000 dependents.
Britain was still echoing to the sound of Enoch Powell's infamous Rivers of Blood speech, claiming immigration was a preventable evil that would destroy the UK.
It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pile.
And the imminent arrival of 30,000 refugees from Africa caused outrage among some parts of the British public. There were marchers opposing Amin's refugees, and some workers at London's Smithfield Market joined the more extreme opponents of the exiled Ugandans.
It's about time we gave the world two fingers like they've been giving us. Australia doesn't want them. Well, we don't want them.
Nobody wants them. We've got no jobs to offer them. You get classed as being a racialist. I mean, they don't live the same as us. Music going on all night, 5 in a bed, and all that business, you know, noise and one thing and another.
So, not every Brit was going to welcome the Ugandan Asians with open arms. But back in the country where they'd become economic powerhouses, things were even worse. Those few words from Idi Amin had thrown their lives into violent turmoil.
Uganda at that moment in time was army everywhere, curfew, shops were closed, people were being battered and beaten up.
They were in a state of absolute panic.
Everything was upside down. We were scared, parents were scared, the whole of the neighborhood was shaken up.
The life as we knew it really stopped existing overnight.
It wasn't unusual to see dead bodies around. It was like a war zone.
In the UK, the government was getting ready to help. Former military bases like this one in Wales were being prepared. part of a Herculean effort to cope with the biggest single wave of immigration in British history. But to flee Uganda and reach that promise of safety, a 17-year-old Azim Somani, his family and tens of thousands of other banished Asians had to constantly run the terrifying gauntlet of military checkpoints. And one journey involved 13 of them.
That means that 13 times they will take your stuff out unless you pay them off. And if you don't give them enough money, then they're going to take your stuff out and mess you up and beat someone up or hurt someone, and people have got daughters and whatnot.
And some had even more reason to fear for their lives. Mansour Mogul was a civic leader who'd negotiated with Idi Amin about the future of Asians in Uganda.
You met Idi Amin several times. What was he like? How would you describe him?
Idi Amin was a very affable person. He laughed a lot, he joked with people, he liked embracing people all the time. But he was a brutal dictator because the only way he could survive in power was by eliminating his enemies, both imaginary and real.
But even though Mansour had met Amin many times, he too became a target for the dictator's brutal tactics.
I came across information which indicated that I was on Idi Amin's hit list and that I was to be eliminated. I was afraid not only for my life, but for my wife and my children.
A close friend warned Mansour of the danger, but while Mansour and his family fled Uganda, the friend couldn't escape Amin's henchmen.
He was caught, and on the foreground of a hotel in Masaka, he is brutally cut up into pieces, and that was indicative of the brutality of Idi Amin.
In that climate of fear, the exiles had to battle through Ugandan bureaucracy to get the documents they needed to leave the country. Khalid Sheikh was just a child in Uganda, but even 40 years on, he still remembers the relief of escaping Amin.
As soon as people got into the aircraft, they were hugging and kissing each other. Strangers, people who never met each other in their lives. That was Britain. As soon as they got on the plane, that was Great Britain for them. Safety.
Britain may well have been safe, but here opposition was mounting. A national poll revealed 54% of the public wanted the Ugandan Asians to go somewhere else.
Britain was still very racially segregated, and anxiety around immigration really played into the hostility which the Ugandan Asians faced when they first arrived. But it's part of the reason why their story is so important.
And the next chapter of that story started at the resettlement camps.
40 years on then, Azim, how does it compare to how it was then?
The place is nothing like what it was then. There were loads of buildings everywhere and people everywhere.
Azim Somani, his parents and his brothers came to this resettlement camp in Wales. It was a temporary home for 1,400 refugees. But 40 years on, only 3 buildings remain.
It's entirely changed now. There are no beds here now. But coming back, does it evoke memories for you?
It certainly does. They had made this kind of place into accommodation for people to be able to live, people to sleep, really.
How many families do you think you'd have?
I would imagine that you would certainly have something like 6 families in here. We lived in a ghetto together. We shared the rooms and we shared the washrooms, but yeah, this is it. This is the building.
Many families stayed together when they were exiled, but Idi Amin's expulsion ripped Azim's family apart.
Do you think that Amin's decision broke your father to some extent?
I think it broke my father completely, because my father was the youngest of the 3 brothers, and the eldest brother, he decided that, well, they collectively decided that their mother couldn't possibly live in this cold weather here. So she had to go and live in India or Pakistan. He never saw her.
Never saw her again.
So it's tough, very tough.
With nearly 30,000 refugees arriving in Britain in the space of a few months, it was important to move them out of the camps and into homes as soon as possible. But that was easier said than done, with one local authority taking a remarkable step to discourage the Asians from coming.
So Leicester's initial reaction to the expulsion was far from welcoming.
Yes, I mean, the City Council took out this advert in the Ugandan Argos, actually warning people to stay away from Leicester because of the conditions that they would face when they came here. Housing, education, social services, health, etc. was all under strain, and so they took the initiative to actually put this advert warning people to stay away effectively.
One of the biggest fears was racism, especially among the small Asian community already in Leicester. Even they didn't want the refugees to come.
Before 1972, Leicester had suffered quite a lot of racism, and things were just beginning to settle down before we heard the news that there was going to be more Asians coming in from Uganda, and we could see it all repeating itself again.
And as refugees like Azim Somani and his parents settled into their new homes, racism was frequently a problem. They were the first Ugandan Asians to move to Stockport, news that made their headlines. But while his neighbours were very friendly, out and about there was constant racial abuse, just like in many other British towns.
What reception did you get in Stockport?
If we were not abused at least 3 times a day, if you were walking down or you're driving, they would stop the car, open the window and they shout, "You Paki bastard." Now see, Paki to me, I had never heard the Paki word before.
This is my passport. I was 14 then, which is a couple of months before we left.
But the abuse was matched by the kindness of others. Chandrika Joshi remembers friendship and support from neighbours, Britons who understood the plight of the refugees and did everything they could to help.
Most of our direct neighbours were very, very kind and very good, in the sense that my mum spoke broken English, and you know, while we went to school, they used to go and knock on her door and take her for coffee mornings and Tupperware parties and that kind of thing.
And 6 months after the first refugees arrived, the camps were closing, almost everyone had been resettled. And ironically, more than a third of the Ugandan Asians, a massive 11,000, moved to one particular city, Leicester. Having left Uganda with nothing, the newcomers to the UK had been met by a mixture of extreme racism and great human kindness. Now they faced the huge task of rebuilding their shattered lives.
They arrived from Uganda, where they'd been the economic powerhouse, but really very much the racial colonial society. And they arrived here with nothing.
Empty pockets, maybe, but the immigrants still had plenty to offer.
They were educated, middle class, quite entrepreneurial in many ways. And there is this kind of mindset which you find especially in people who are forced to flee, that if you've lost everything, then you can't lose anything else. And often you see in refugees is that there's more willingness to take risks.
And who'd wear this then? Is this a...
This is more for the bride.
So this is all hand embroidered?
Yes, this is all hand embroidered.
Ranju Moda was one of the risk takers. She came to Britain when she was 12. Now she's established an Asian fashion shop, following her parents' entrepreneurial spirit and work ethic.
How hard did they have to work to get things going?
We all had to work very, very hard. And we still are working very hard. We were at school. Once I was 16, I got a weekend job. So I was paying for my own education and for all my own expenses. And so did my brothers and sisters.
The
colours are still alive, the sari tradition is still alive.
It's clear that this business and the people it employs contribute to the economy. But the designs that Ranju and her son Karan create also add to Britain's cultural mix.
She's used her influence of being in this country by having the modern layer system. She's used her original designs with a 21st century twist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I see from the saris the ladies are wearing here, there's quite a lot of African influence there.
Especially what this lady's wearing here, the zebra kind of prints, which obviously zebra is Africa, so why not throw that into a sari?
Ugandan Asians like Chandrika Joshi have also added to the religious diversity of the UK. 40 years ago, the refugees came to Britain with a range of religions. And today, Chandrika's a practicing Hindu priest, just like her father was in Uganda. Food is another multicultural contribution. Restaurants like this one are now a familiar part of Britain. But Bobby's was groundbreaking when it was opened in 1976 by owner Bhagwanjibai Lakhani. And today, traditional Ugandan food is still on the menu.
So Nisha, this is how you bring a little bit of Uganda to Leicester.
That's right,
What
absolutely.
have we got?
So we've got cassava, which we actually call mogo. Basically, what we do is we make chips out of it, we grill it, and today, what we're hoping to make is a curry with coconut.
And for you then, cassava is a real taste of being small in Uganda.
Uganda, that's right, absolutely.
So how important is it for you to keep the kind of Ugandan Asian traditions alive?
I think it's quite important because although I feel Leicester's my home, because I've been here long enough to feel that, there is still a nostalgia around Uganda and the fact that I come from there. So there's still part of me that kind of resonates with that. I also feel for my children it's quite important to know about where their mum and their grandparents in particular come from.
So, individual Ugandan Asians have clearly created profitable businesses and successful lives here in Britain, just as their forefathers did in Uganda. But you have to come to Leicester to see the remarkable impact they've had as a community.
They built really successful businesses. In Leicester, for instance, 30,000 jobs created by just 10,000 Ugandan Asians over the past 40 years. One of the most interesting things is that they really have taken on citizenship in Britain. That's a very interesting contrast to some of the other migrant groups who've arrived, where perhaps they've been quite successful economically, but they've been more reluctant to engage in the whole community.
Leicester's Belgrave Road is the beacon of Ugandan Asian success. In 1972, this was a rundown area that attracted the immigrants because property was cheap. Today, they've helped to transform it into the Golden Mile, an Asian business and shopping area that has a worldwide reputation. Sir Peter Soulsby became a city councillor in 1973, so he's seen every step of the Ugandan Asians' British journey.
The Ugandan Asians who came to Leicester came carrying very little in their suitcases, but what they brought with them was a range of skills, a determination, an ambition for themselves and for their children that has, over the succeeding decades, affected every aspect of the life of our city and enriched every aspect of the life of our city, and for which we are enormously grateful.
And even the Leicester Asians, who 40 years ago wanted nothing to do with the immigrants, have changed their view.
I think we were all wrong, because 40 years on, it's the best thing that happened to Leicester. The Golden Mile, if it wasn't for these people, I'm not saying all of them, but majority of them, it's put Leicester on the map throughout the world.
But as you might expect with a community that's rebuilt itself on British soil, the Ugandan Asians are now searching out new horizons, but back in the old country.
How's it going?
Clifton Packaging is another Ugandan Asian success story. It packages foods for major high street names. And now Chairman Khalid Sheikh is returning to Africa to give the economy there a helping hand.
We have excelled to become experts in our field of food packaging. We've got knowledge, and we want to transfer this knowledge back to Uganda and help them.
The President of Uganda has visited the Leicester factory to encourage the creation of new links. And with Khalid's help, Uganda could earn much more from its natural resources.
I created an organization and a brand called Baba, Buy African, Build Africa, Love Africa as you love your mother.
If products like water and coffee can be packaged up like this, they can then be sold on for considerably higher profits.
And primarily, the excitement of going back, apart from personal sentimental reason, is to put something back into the country where we spend the best part of our childhood.
The 40th anniversary of the expulsion now marks a transformation of the lives of the exiles and of Britain itself.
They used to live in a small hut like that.
As they recall happy times in their former homeland, these Ugandan Asians are safe in the knowledge that they have helped Britain develop into a more tolerant, multicultural country, one that seems worlds removed from the 1970s.
Because I used to have mangoes when I came home from school.
Exactly, I brought colour. These are all Swahili words.
And the city where their numbers and their influence have been the greatest will soon have reached 2 landmarks. It's expected to become the first in Britain with a minority white population. And it's already being held up as a multicultural success story.
And people come from all over Britain, from all over Europe, to look at our model of racial harmony.
It is generally the case that we have a degree of cohesion in the diversity of Leicester that others envy, and I think rightly so.
So, 2 generations after the most dramatic upheaval in their history, Ugandan Asians are once again playing a lead role in a foreign country they're now proud to call home.
We made it. We came out of Uganda. We were determined, like lots of Ugandan Asians have done. I'm very proud of them, actually, that we have mixed into our communities.
We can tell the world that we've been instrumental in contributing towards the prosperity of the United Kingdom in the same way as our parents were doing in Uganda before we were kicked out.
The fact that I've got a dog now, which I could never even think when I was a child, because we never knew anyone who had pets. You know, every time I take him for a walk, I think, my God, see how British I've become now.
And Britain has reason to be proud of the Ugandan Asians too, 40 years after they became somewhat uninvited guests.
You can certainly see a parallel between the experiences of the Ugandan Asians and the experiences, if you like, of the broader British journey towards understanding multiculturalism. In contributing to this multicultural society, they've really challenged this idea that migration should always be seen as a threat, it's something to be feared, because they've shown that actually it can be a real opportunity to develop, not just for the migrants, but also for the communities that they join.
And Britain's links with Uganda could soon become even stronger. There are now plans to twin Leicester with the Ugandan town of Jinja. Now, if you'd like more information on tonight's programme, please visit our website at itv.com/tonight. But for now, good evening and thanks for watching. Coming up tomorrow night, the first of 3 special Tonight programmes looking at the food we eat, how it's produced and why it's getting more and more expensive.